he could be fifth or sixth in ownership, and all of the guys that are going to be popular are kind of bunched together in salary. I don't think people are really going to pay down at.
We are back. This is Joe Holka Show presented by FanDuel. Week 8 tournament plays of the week, position by position, guys that might go overlooked in GPPs that can help us get to the top of the DFS leaderboards, plus showing you guys how to use that information to build a lineup for GPP specifically live at the end.
Mr. Holka, how you doing? Excited to be here as always, but a little nervous. Not to talk to you, but right before we hop on here early Thursday morning, I start running my ownership projections in preparation for this show, and this is about as lost on ownership projections I've been all season.
Interesting.
I think like the relative numbers, I think we're always going to get kind of decent, but it's just kind of hard to figure out, especially on FanDuel, where people are going to be paying down, if people are going to be paying up for Henry at all, and like just a couple of those dominoes can really make ownership numbers scramble up a bit. So it's going to be an interesting week, I think.
That always scares me, man. Like, I feel like sometimes my worst weeks are the ones where it's really difficult to like identify where the chalk and where the leverage is. So if it's somewhere in between, especially with like, there's a lot of great content out there that didn't used to be talking about all these tournament strategies and lower owned plays and all of that stuff. So sometimes it's used the other way, and some of the best plays end up going lower than they should. So those are the weeks that are the most frustrating, when obviously you can identify some of the best plays, and then you flip the cards over and they're 10%. And then you're sitting there just like, well, at that point, I leveraged nothing. Some of the guys that I thought would be sub 10 or 15, and then they're completely different plays, right? So very interesting. Your quarterback GPP play of the week, I haven't heard a lot of people talk about yet, which is crazy because Tom Brady has been so good this year. He's 8,300 against New Orleans. Obviously, New Orleans is like an interesting spot across the board because I think Kamara is going to come in at pretty high ownership on FanDuel because of basically just his price. And we just saw Tampa Bay get run all over a little bit last week. So it's an interesting one because Brady, he is very expensive. Most people at that point are just going to pay up for your boy Josh Allen, right? Is that the thought process here?
Yep, I do think that we are going to the one position I think we could be pretty confident in is the quarterback. We got the Rams and the Bills with the huge implied point totals, but the Buccaneers are right behind them with 28. Now I know the gap there is pretty big. The Bills and the Rams both projected for over 31, both very high in passing rate. Even though there's questions about Jalen Hurts possibly being benched, I think he still is somewhat popular just because he's putting up so many points every single week. And then even maybe like Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, not necessarily popular, but keep someone like a Brady in that like 5-6% range. So if I could get Brady on FanDuel, really I'm just chasing touchdowns, right, on FanDuel as much as possible. So if I could get a quarterback that leads a league in neutral passing rate, that leads a league in passing rate over expectation in almost every category, and that's why I like Brady in the spot, because even if they do get up on New Orleans, the Bucs have showed a propensity. They're just going to throw all game no matter what. So I like that. I think another reason people are going to shy away from this is because if Gronk does come back, it's just back to the situation of like, well, who do I stack Brady with? Take your pick. I mean, I think they're priced pretty close together, Godwin and Evans, and you could throw Gronk in there if you want. If you like Kamara, I think it makes for a really good game correlation. We've seen people getting away from bringbacks a little bit, but I think this is actually a really good spot for it because New Orleans just doesn't have anybody else that they're even using. So with all that said, I mean, Brady could end up being with all the guys I mentioned. He could be fifth or sixth in ownership, and all of the guys that are going to be popular are kind of bunched together in salary. I don't think people are really going to pay down at quarterback this week because all the top options are in really good spots. So you could get the least popular guy in the salary tier with as much upside as anybody.
Yeah, Reeves made a really good point on the stacks video. So if you haven't checked that video out yet, definitely check that out next. Just about Brady specifically on a week like this where we don't have a lot of those super high-end rushing. We have no Kyler, we have no Lamar. So someone like Brady, who we know can score touchdowns, is a little bit more appealing on a slate like this where there's not a lot of like differentiation. Like we obviously have Josh Allen and Hurts, but past that, like we don't have like that rushing type of ability to just like separate at the quarterback position. So at that point, touchdowns become even more important. So I love the Brady play this week. I also think that in terms of like who people are going to play him with. Like, no one wants to play Evans against Lattimore, so we could see Adams go super, or Evans, sorry, I should say, go super low, and then Chris Godwin I think is going to be the chalk, but he's basically the same price, and it is a little bit more spread out now. And anytime this happens with Tampa Bay and Brady, people just don't play it because they don't know who to play it with, right? So I guess I'm curious your thought on Evans versus Godwin when the ownership's going to be basically half, but he hasn't performed very well against Lattimore in the past or a lot of these really high end cornerbacks.
Yeah, maybe it's a leak, but I like leaning into these perceived tough matchups, just because again we are chasing touchdowns, right? So if the Buccaneers are driving consistently, even if it is Godwin and Evans ends up with like just like a 5 for 50 day, if Brady decides to target him twice near the goal line, that 550 day with 2 touchdowns is a very good day at half the ownership of Godwin. So I'm fine stacking him with Evans. I actually have him in my primary build right now with Evans just because of everything you mentioned. And again, going back to Gronk possibly coming back, I think it only kind of brings all their ownership down even more. And again, even if Godwin is chalk, like what's he going to be chalk, like 25% maybe? Again, we're not going to have, I don't think we're kind of back to like 3-4 weeks ago. I don't think we're going to have a 30% guy in the slate at all. I think everybody's going to be the top guys will be 25%. We haven't seen that maybe 3 weeks. A few weeks ago, we were talking about that that's the situation. Just play your guys. And if you whiff on ownership, I mean, I think it's a week just to whiff on ownership and play your favorite plays.
Yep, really high total for Tampa Bay, obviously, in this one. So love the call with Brady. Let's move on to the running back position, TJ, because this is one that actually is a decent amount of leverage off of your boy Jake Seeley's team, where he was talking about Joe Burrow in the passing game for Cincinnati. But what about Joe Mixon at 7,600 against the Jets? Sounds like this is probably a pivot, but more of a leverage play, right? Because I think these Cincinnati guys are going to be pretty popular.
It's a little bit of both. This is the position that I'm really all over the place with ownership right now. I think Darrell Henderson and DeAndre Swift are going to be pretty popular. Henderson at 77, Swift at 79. After that, I think it could go a lot of different ways. But with Henderson at 77, with Swift at 79, and then CPAT to a lesser extent at 73, I just think in this price range, people aren't going to really look to Joe Mixon because we saw him get 50% of the touches last week, come off the injury a couple weeks ago where he did see like 64% of the backfield touches. But I think there's going to be enough concern there compared to the other guys that if people are targeting this game, it's going to be with the passing attack after what we saw from the Bengals against the Ravens last week. And then on top of that, I don't know if everybody does this as much as I do. Maybe it's one of those things where I just project my own process onto the field, but I think people are going to look at the point spreads. And a lot of times if Mixon is a 10.5 point favorite, they would take the risk on, his 50% workload. But you got the Darrell Henderson at the 14%. I think people will look at the Bills and somebody like a Zach Moss might just get a little bit more popular than usual because they are 14-point favorites. So I actually think that Mixon in a matchup against the Jets, who are the worst team in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, even if they get up big, if he gets up to that 65% touch share like we saw 2 weeks ago, he can more than pay off his salary. We saw last week, Henderson, as great as he is, as good of a spot it is, there's just so much that could go in terms of passing touchdown variance in the offense. DeAndre Swift, I mean, he's balling, but on FanDuel, he got the 2 touchdowns last week. But if you don't get touchdowns on FanDuel, you could be in trouble. And I mean, that's always Swift. He's always going to be the concern that he might not get touchdowns just because the Lions are just a bad team. So I do think Mixon can be a really good leverage play off of both of those guys, off of that that passing offense, and he's stackable with his defense because the Jets are playing Mike White at quarterback, I guess. So just play the Bengals defense against a bad offensive line with a guy that's never started before.
Yeah, it's almost like that double leverage spot that you talk about. It's a pivot because of the guys that are priced around him. It's Henderson, it's Swift, it's those guys. But also, like, if we're going to see guys like T. Higgins be extremely popular on the passing side of things, like, you get kind of that double equity there in tournaments. So love the Joe Mixon call. Before we move on to wide receiver, if you're one of those people who doesn't watch this live, start with us next week, every Monday and Thursday, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time. Of course, the big show is on Sunday morning from 9 a.m. to noon to get you guys ready for kickoff. All right, let's talk about wide receiver. And it does seem to be like a week where a lot of people are going to be paying up at wide receiver. We're going to talk about a guy that's a little bit cheaper. Van Jefferson, he's 5,700 against Houston in this spot where he has been like that easy guy to add to Stafford stacks, but he's almost always coming in at super low ownership. So I love the price point. Sounds like you like him as a GPP play this week.
Yep, and that's kind of what I had in my notes about Jefferson. I think when you hear his name, it's obvious why you would think about him because you're going to have Stafford, Cup, Henderson all get ownership. He's not really a leverage play off of those guys because I don't think there's really any situation where you're playing Jefferson as a one-off. I think you want him as using him with minis with Cup or Henderson or in full stacks with the Rams, but you're going to make your stacks lower owned with him because, and again, another note I had that people aren't going to be paying down for their wide receivers this week. I think if people are paying down, they're going to be paying up at running back. We have 5 of the top 7 tight ends in terms of points per game off of the main slate. So I think people are just going to have to pay down at tight end because Pitts is the only one that's really expensive that people are going to use. And then I guess they're going to find ways to pay down at running back, like Elijah Mitchell, Zach Moss, who I already mentioned, maybe even Michael Carter, just going to be the throw-ins that people get cheap with. So if you could do that with the Van Jefferson instead, one thing I talked about in my GPP article review this week is flipping that build, right? So even if everybody is playing the Rams, if you're one of the few teams that's paying down at wide receiver, you're naturally going to start having a lineup that looks different than other lineups, even if you have similar players. And that's what we saw. I mean, this was on like, I don't think a lot of people did this with Foster Moreau on FanDuel last week, but if you did pivot to him, like you just had a very different build than everybody else. And I think that's kind of what Van Jefferson offers this week. And then on top of all of that, all of the theory reasons you play him, we saw his usage last week, 94% of the snaps, season high, 70% target share, season high. Him and Deshaun, the only players with average depths of target over 10 yards. The Texans last in the league in fantasy points per pass attempt on passes 15 plus yards downfield. So that's Jefferson's strength, that's Ram's strength, and there's lots of GPP theory reasons to play him this week.
Yeah, the last 4 weeks so far, obviously Cooper Kupp running away with weighted opportunity, target share, all that stuff. But just in comparison to Robert Woods, like it's pretty similar, TJ, like almost the exact same air yards. But you see like Van Jefferson still like is providing more touchdown upside. Like the yards after the catch is a little bit of an edge for Robert Woods, but the prices aren't even close is what I'm getting at, right? Like, so you can play them at lower ownership. You can get them at a much lower salary. So I love the idea of flipping the build specifically, because personally, I don't do that enough at times too. It's nice to look at the opposite of the way that people are going to build. Sometimes what you can do with these lineup builders is just see what type of roster construction they're, I guess, popping out from an optimal perspective and just figure out a way to still build a really good and highly projected team. Just do it a little bit differently with salaries and the positions. So I love that. Let's talk about tight end. Noah Fant, he's 5,800 against Washington. Obviously, a really nice pivot off of someone like Dallas Goedert in that same price range. We talked a little bit about Dan Arnold, who I think is going to be a little bit more popular on DraftKings for a little bit cheaper. But man, Noah Fant against Washington, it's the same thing. Like we talked about Courtland Sutton a little bit earlier this week also. Like we've been falling over ourselves to play people against Washington. And now Noah Fant, like another one of these like high upside tight ends, is just going to go overlooked. It's a great spot.
Yeah, I wanted to suggest Teddy at the top here at quarterback, but just looking at the slate and how many quarterbacks are in good spots, I don't know if it's a week to like take a Teddy. I don't know if a 21 or 22 from Teddy is going to get it done with so many quarterbacks. It could go for 30 plus, even with the salary savings. But all that is said to say, I was looking through thinking about the Denver pass game, thinking about wanting to attack Washington somehow. And I fell on Fant looking at exactly what you said. Goddard in a very similar price range. Maybe to a lesser extent, RSJ on the other side. Maybe Uzoma on the at a very similar price range if people look at the big game and just decide they want to start stacking Cincinnati a bunch. So Noah Fant could be kind of the odd man out in that 56 to 5,900 price range. And Denver's just going to be, with Jerry Jeudy back, it's just going to make the passing offense that much better. But I think that problem of trying to figure out what Jeudy is going to do to impact the pass catchers probably is more of a Tim Patrick and to a lesser extent Cortland Sutton concern than it is Noah Fant, who's locked into his role as a tight end. So like him at this spot. Again, I mentioned all of those tight ends off the slate. So if you aren't paying for Pitts, and I don't know if people are going to pay for Gesicki, even though it's like a bring back. The Bills defense is so good. I just don't know if people are going to try to bring back the Dolphins. So I'm just like, what tight end do you like? I do like to correlate my tight ends, and I don't see myself correlating Fant with anybody. So that's the only downside to him. But I just think I want to attack this Washington passing defense somehow.
It's such a weird week at tight end, man, because I still think that like part of like just being, I guess, looking at like people are going to open the app and they're going to see Kyle Pitts being the most expensive tight end, and it's easy to skip over him because there's so many of these other weapons that, I mean, are much cheaper that at least like on the outside look like they have similar ceilings. So it is interesting. I kind of am intrigued by Kyle Pitts, but there's so many guys in mid-range.
I think people are going to play Pitts.
Okay, so it's not even really chasing at this point. It's like we've finally seen the reveal that he's like this athletic freak, wide receiver type of tight end, and now people are like ready to start playing him. You're probably right.
I think so. I mean, and when I say play him, he's not going to be like a 20% guy, but 14% at tight end is a pretty high number.
Okay, I'm with you on that. So let's talk about the DST position here. And looks like the 49ers at Chicago might be, I'm not sure if they're going to be popular or not, but people don't like to pay all the way up for defense basically ever. So I love these opportunities to try and get these situations in general at a little bit lower ownership. So we'll see where that shakes out. But as of right now, just anything against Chicago seems like a good idea. I haven't been, I guess, putting him, in my rear view like I should have quickly enough in terms of Justin Fields. So 49ers defense, your GPP defense of the week. Tell us why.
I'm just looking at what we have available this week, and I mentioned the Rams, Bengals, and Bills all favored by 10 or more. The Rams favored by 14. I think people, if they do decide to pay up, it's going to be with one of those three. Like, why go to San Francisco at 46 when you could get Buffalo for 200 more, Cincy for 300 more? Rams at 5,000 is pretty expensive, but we have seen people like try to go to these teams with the bigger spreads. So even though the 49ers are only favored by 3.5, they're playing against Chicago with an implied point total of just 18 points. Chicago's last in adjusted sack rate allowed to opposing defenses. I mean, obviously we want to be targeting defenses that are going to be throwing a lot, but Chicago, I think we can get away from that a little bit just because they've been so sloppy, because Justin Fields has been so turnover prone. I mean, you don't even have to be a film watcher. If you're just on Twitter clicking around, you see people showing him holding the ball and looking at a receiver for the whole 3 seconds he drops back. You're just standard receiver holding the ball, not doing anything to get away from pass rush. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And again, I mentioned, where are people going to save salary this week? I think by the time we get to Sunday, it could be a lot, especially on FanDuel, where people want to play running backs. It could be a lot of Elijah Mitchell just because he got so much work in that nationally televised game. So why not throw in the 49ers with Mitchell if he does end up being popular and you need him to save, and you're going to get, I don't know if he gets to 20%, but if he's like 17, 18% and you're worried about having that like a chalky cheap guy, throw the 49ers defense in there with him.
Yeah, I don't think we talk about enough sometimes. Just like the combination ownership is a lot more important than just the singular ownership, because you're already going to be different than all of the people that didn't play them with the 49ers defense. So I like that thought process a lot. All right, everyone out there, you know the drill. We've heard from TJ. Now I want you to let me know in the comments, pause this video if you have to, your favorite Week 8 tournament play. TJ, ready to build a FanDuel team, my man?
We could try.
We can try. All right. That's all we ask, is that we try. This team will be in the listener league at fanduel.com/Holka. Make sure you guys get in there before it fills. It is rake free. It is $5. It is a 3-max tournament, huge prizes. More importantly, it is the battle of the guests. So Jake Seeley, Rich Rebar, and of course, TJ will have a lineup that we build on stream in this thing. It's not easy to build a lineup this early in the week. So some more free money at times for you guys. So TJ,
this isn't a low ball tournament between me, Reeves, and Seeley.
If that's the case, if that is the case, then I probably would have a little bit more money than I do. The low ball has been in play for sure. But I will say that Reeves got me some of the only money back that I got all of last week with his team. So it's hard for me to toss too much shade after my week last week. That's for sure. So let's turn it around this week.
All right.
What are you thinking here? Stack wise,
let's start with the contrarian stack of Brady and Let's go with the Evans in the bad matchup against Lattimore, and I'm not going to go double stack. I'm not going to go bring back with
Ballsy.
Kamara yet, just because I do think it is really important to have some Rams and Bills, and all those guys are going to be pretty expensive. So I want to see how that kind of plays out.
Okay, I'm with you. So is there a cheaper piece that you want to put in here to give yourself a little bit of flexibility to get up to those Rams guys, or what are your thoughts with that?
I think I think I'm going to want like a van mini with one of his teammates. I don't know if it's Cup or Hendo.
Okay. Van obviously helps a lot. Even just
Yeah.
that play alone, you still have defense left, obviously, but 6,400 the rest of the way, it's so wide open at that point.
Yeah, I'm tempted to. I hate fading Cup, but I mean it can't be every single week. And like Henderson coming off of my thought process on Henderson. My thought process on Henderson right now is that if he comes even close to value last week, he is the 35 or 40% play this week. Just because they're such big favorites and they've been giving him so much of the running back work. So he's not like super cheap. What is he, 77? Yeah. So I mean, if you have his decent week last week, he might be 85 this week.
Agreed.
and be like 30% in this spot. So I think Henderson is just like misvalued in terms of salary and ownership this week, even though he is going to be popular.
You're gonna hear everyone in the world talking about how pass heavy they've been close to the goal line, in the red zone, all of that stuff, right? So like you said, if any of that's used back towards Henderson, this is just a really nice price for him, where if he would have gotten in the box a few times over these last couple of weeks, I mean, he'd be well over 8K at this point.
Yeah.
So
and he's involved there. He caught a touchdown pass 2 weeks ago, and
True.
I think he had an end zone target last week. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure end zone target last week.
That's interesting. I mean, he did have 6 targets last week too, so it's not like he's not being used in the passing game. So that's definitely something that probably isn't talked about enough. Is there like, are you going to go back with Cooks on the other side of that, or do you just want to keep like a little skinny Ram side on this one?
No, I want to make room for a Bill specifically. I'm having it's really scary to pay up. Like you said, people are going to be paying up for pass catchers. To pay up and not have a Cooper Kupp is like really scary. But
I've been there, man. It has not been fun for me doing that same exact thing.
The thing I really can't get away from on both sides is like their pricing. Diggs is priced down with Antonio Brown, who isn't playing, and Cortland Sutton, and Chris Godwin, like, and a DK Metcalf who doesn't have a quarterback. And we're putting Stephon Diggs down there. It's like, it just feels like that play we're going to look at and be like, he's 7,300 and he's not in every one of our lineups.
Man, I'm telling you right now, I don't care about the ownership. I'm going to have a very heavy Bills stack on this one, because I think there's enough plays in this game that we can use to differentiate the stack in particular. Yes, I love Diggs. I think he's going to be pretty high owned at that price. Love Allen just because he, like you said, he differentiates just the quarterback position this week, where it's a little bit tougher to do that some other weeks. But man, you can throw in Emmanuel Sanders at super low ownership. You can throw in a guy like Gabriel Davis with no Dawson Knox at super low ownership. So you can really differentiate the Bills even more than some of these other plays. So man, I'm saying it right now. It's a Thursday. I'm having 2 main teams this week. I'd be shocked if one of them is not a Bill stack.
Yeah, you know what I kind of like here, and I've seen this pop up a couple times, and it's really counterintuitive to what we think about when we're stacking, but has been a pass catcher with their defense, and what that just leans into the idea of a complete blowout. I don't remember if it was on FanDuel or DraftKings last week, but the winner I had the Buccaneers with the Buccaneers passing offense with Buccaneers defense. But that kind of makes sense. We think about correlation with the defensive running back, right? But if a team's just blowing out the opponent, which I think Buffalo could do to Miami this week, there's a good chance they got there if they're a passing team through the air. And what do we talk about? We want our defenses that are in situations where the opponent has to pass. How does that happen? The other team passed really well. So it kind of makes sense to have like a wide receiver with his defense. So let's throw in a Bills defense with Diggs and see what happens here.
Yeah, I think that sometimes the correlation stuff is super overblown. I'm as guilty of it. I think I talked about this on one of the other builds today. Just like having a wide receiver with the defense in theory just seems like it's not smart. But if it happens in the correct order, TJ, and they blow them out early through the air, and then the rest of the game, it doesn't really matter what happens with Stephon Diggs, because you have the Bills defense on the other side of it in a really good spot. Both can easily get there, especially the mega blowouts, right? Because all you need is one big play from the defense to get there. And at that point, if the game script is right, you're probably already there with your wide receiver too. So I should probably start doing that kind of thing a little bit more just to differentiate. I think maybe more of a small field play, but maybe not. I don't know. Definitely interesting. 6,200 the rest of the way after we put defense in. So you definitely have some room here.
How chalky do you think this lineup is right now? Like Diggs is going to be popular-ish.
No one's playing Evans.
Hender's going to be popular-ish. Evans and so we're pretty. We can go pretty chalky here for the rest of the way, I think.
Yeah, I think you need one piece that's somewhat different, but man, I think you're already so differentiated by. I think Evans could be sub 10 after last week, which is crazy to me. Maybe I'm wrong. People lean into these Lattimore things like very heavily, man.
Weird.
Weird. Yeah, I agree.
I think we could pretty much go anywhere on ownership now. And running back, I don't think we're good. If we pay up for running back, it's going to cripple us. How much do we have per player right now?
6,200. So I don't think we can get up to the big dog on this one, but you can probably get to the Camaro range if you wanted to.
What about
JT? Those type of guys, I think probably in play.
What does Mixon, who we brought up earlier, leave us with?
56 the rest of the way, which is fine. 56. I like the Mixon idea, especially with this team that doesn't have any Cincy pieces so far.
What tight end do we like? If we go cheap tight end, is there a cheap tight end we like this week?
Dan Arnold.
Yeah, let's go. Oh, let's do that.
4,900.
Yeah, let's go Dan Arnold.
Because everyone's going to play him on DraftKings. I don't think people are going to play him on FanDuel, though.
Yeah, I like that.
So that gives you 6,300 in the flex. So the range that you're looking at there is essentially T. Higgins, Devonta Smith. Who else we got? We got Corey Davis. If you did want a mini to that Cincinnati stuff, that might be thin. Or you can just add a little bit more to your Buffalo side if you wanted to go Zach Moss, Cole Beasley, those type of guys. It is kind of a weird range. I'll say that. You could go Cooks if you just want to leave a little bit on the table. 6,300.
Let's try this. Let's move down off Mixon.
Okay.
I think I like. I'm really worried about Elijah Mitchell because we talked about like paying for touchdowns, and I just don't know if there's really touchdowns in that game. But I do think Chuba is still really underpriced for his workload.
Chuba's not going to be owned, I don't think. I could be wrong. 6,600, maybe you will be. That's a really nice price. You're right.
Yeah, that's super low. So let's see if we go Chuba, that lets us
7,300 now. So at that point, you could play another piece of that Atlanta game. You could play Patterson, or you could double. Yeah, you could play. That's probably what we should do, right?
I think double. Yeah, I think that's the move.
I like it.